On October 30th, 1964, employees at the American Museum of Natural History in New York were shocked to discover that the museum's gem exhibit had been broken into. More than 20 rare gemstones had disappeared, including the Star of India, the world's most famous star sapphire, weighing an incredible 563 carats. At the time, it was considered one of the most valuable treasures in the United States. Police quickly launched an investigation and believed the thieves had to be highly skilled professionals who had spent months planning the heist. However, when the identity of the mastermind was finally revealed, everyone was stunned. The man behind this daring theft was not an international master thief or a safe-cracking expert. He was simply a young surfer named Jack Murphy. So, how did someone with such an unlikely background manage to pull off one of the most famous museum robberies in American history? To understand that, we need to go back to where it all began. If you enjoy true stories about famous crimes and the hidden weaknesses in systems that seem impossible to defeat, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos.
Jack Roland Murphy was born on May 26, 1937, in Oceanside, California, United States. From an early age, Murphy was different from most children. He learned to play the violin at a young age and showed remarkable talent in both music and sports as he grew older. Murphy earned a tennis scholarship to the University of Pittsburgh. For many people, this could have been the beginning of a stable and successful future. But Murphy had no desire to follow a path that others had already laid out for him. After spending some time at the university, he left school and moved to Florida. It was there that Murphy discovered his greatest passion, surfing. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, he quickly became one of the most recognizable figures in the East Coast surfing scene and earned the nickname Muff the Surf. On the surface, Murphy was a young athlete living a carefree life by the beach. But behind that image, he was becoming increasingly drawn to dangerous adventures and the thrill of overcoming challenges that others would never dare attempt. And it was this desire for excitement that led him to a decision that would change his life forever. In Florida, Jack Murphy quickly became a well-known figure in the surfing community. On the surface, his life seemed carefree, exciting, and enviable. But as time went on, Murphy found himself drawn more to the thrill of risk and adventure than to athletic competition. While most people saw a successful surfer enjoying life by the ocean, Murphy began spending time with individuals who lived on the edge and believed in making money the fast way. Before long, he became involved in a series of break-ins targeting upscale homes along Florida's Biscayne Bay. Thanks to his boldness, careful planning, and sharp eye for detail, Murphy repeatedly managed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. Local newspapers eventually gave him a nickname that captured his growing reputation: the Miami Cat Burglar, a thief known for slipping into luxurious waterfront mansions without leaving a trace. But after a while, burglarizing private homes no longer gave Murphy the excitement he was looking for. He wanted something bigger, something bolder, something that would make headlines across the country. Then in 1964, Murphy and his associates set their sights on a place that almost nobody believed could ever be robbed: the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. It was the beginning of a plan that would lead to one of the most famous gemstone heists in American history. During the early 1960s, Murphy began spending more and more time with his new group of friends rather than focusing on surfing competitions. During the day, he still appeared on the beach as a well-known surfer. But after sunset, Murphy often drove with friends through the wealthy neighborhoods along Biscayne Bay. These areas were home to some of the largest and most expensive mansions in the Miami area at the time. At first, Murphy was simply curious, enjoyed observing how wealthy people lived. The private docks, luxury yachts, and waterfront estates created a world that felt completely different from the lives of most Florida residents. But the more he watched, the more he began noticing something else. Many homes filled with valuable property were not nearly as secure as people believed. Some homeowners traveled for days at a time. Some estates were left virtually unattended at night. Alarm systems were still relatively basic and far less common than they would become in later years. Murphy began memorizing everything. He paid attention to window locations, fence heights, hidden access paths, and the times lights were turned on and off each evening. What set Murphy apart from most people was his ability to observe details. While others saw beautiful mansions, Murphy saw ways to access them. Gradually, these drives stopped being casual sightseeing trips. They became reconnaissance missions. Murphy began to believe he could enter and leave many of these homes without being detected. And the more he thought about it, the more fascinated he became. That was the moment a dangerous idea began to take shape in Jack Murphy's mind, an idea that would eventually transform him from a celebrated surfer into one of the most notorious burglars in American history. In the early 1960s, many affluent neighborhoods in Florida seemed almost completely secure. The waterfront mansions along Biscayne Bay sat behind large fences, beside private docks, and were often owned by successful businessmen, doctors, and other wealthy residents. From the outside, these properties appeared to be heavily protected. But as Murphy continued observing them for weeks, he began to notice a very different reality. At the time, surveillance cameras were virtually non-existent in private, residential neighborhoods. Electronic alarm systems were still relatively basic, and many homeowners did not have them installed at all. Many residents believed that the secluded locations of their estates were enough to keep unwanted visitors away. Some families regularly spent weekends on their yachts or left town for days at a time without anyone watching over their property. At night, the waterfront roads often became deserted. Once homeowners turned off their lights and went to bed, the entire area fell almost completely silent. Murphy realized that most of the security in these neighborhoods relied on one simple assumption. People believed that no one would be bold enough to enter such wealthy communities and attempt a burglary. But Murphy saw things differently. He began paying attention to the dark spaces between the mansions, the fences that could be climbed, the private docks hidden behind homes, and the areas shielded from the view of neighboring properties. The more he observed, the more he realized that the greatest weakness was not the locks or the alarm systems. The greatest weakness was complacency. The people living in some of Florida's most expensive neighborhoods believed they were far better protected than they actually were. That was the vulnerability Murphy began to see. And once he recognized it, he stopped simply watching. He began thinking about how to take advantage of it. After weeks of observing the waterfront estates along Biscayne Bay, Murphy no longer viewed his nighttime drives as simple curiosity, now had a purpose. Instead of merely admiring the luxurious homes, Murphy focused on understanding how they operated. He paid attention to when homeowners left, when lights were turned off, and the periods when entire neighborhoods became almost completely deserted. Murphy and his associates repeatedly returned to the same residential areas. They drove down the same streets over and over, walked through the same neighborhoods multiple times, and memorized details that most people would never notice. Gradually, a clear pattern began to emerge. Some mansions were regularly left empty on weekends. Some owners departed on their yachts and disappeared for days at a time. Others were actually easier to access from the water than from the street. Murphy paid particular attention to homes located in more isolated areas. The fewer neighbors nearby, the less likely anyone would notice unusual activity during the night. Also realized that most residents felt far too secure. Many of them never imagined that someone would spend weeks carefully studying their neighborhood in such detail. While homeowners believed their fences and waterfront locations were enough to protect their property, Murphy was building a plan around that very confidence. Every trip provided new information. Every return visit gave him a deeper understanding of the area. And the more he understood the system, the more convinced he became that the first burglaries could succeed. That was the moment the observation phase ended, and the preparation phase began. After weeks of surveillance, Murphy believed he had gathered enough information, was no longer spending his time studying the area. Now he was ready to act. His first targets were not the most famous mansions or the homes most talked about among Miami's wealthy elite. Instead, Murphy focused on properties that attracted less attention, places where the owners could be gone for days without anyone noticing anything unusual. At night, when the waterfront neighborhoods became quiet, Murphy and his associates moved toward the locations they had already selected. Everything happened faster than he had expected. No alarms went off, no one appeared to stop them. Those early successes reinforced Murphy's belief that he understood the wealthy communities along Biscayne Bay better than the people who lived there. Each time he left a property without being detected, his confidence grew. With every successful break-in, he became more convinced that he knew the area better than its owners did. Over time, small burglaries were no longer enough. Murphy began turning his attention toward more valuable targets and locations that could bring him recognition within criminal circles. What made the biggest difference was not the money, it was the success. At first, Murphy had simply been looking for opportunities. But after achieving results again and again without facing any serious obstacles, he started believing he could go much further. That confidence gradually turned into ambition. And that ambition would eventually lead Murphy far beyond the waterfront mansions of Florida. His attention shifted toward a completely different target located more than 1,000 miles away, a place where most people believed nothing could possibly be stolen. That was the moment the idea for the most famous heist of Jack Murphy's life first began to take shape. The burglaries in Florida brought Murphy money, confidence, and a growing reputation within local criminal circles. But they also created a new problem: was beginning to find his old targets uninteresting. Murphy no longer wanted to be remembered as just another burglar breaking into waterfront mansions. He wanted to pull off a heist that would make his name known across America. Around 1964, Murphy and his associates began turning their attention toward New York. It was home to some of the nation's most famous museums, priceless collections, and institutions that the public believed were completely secure. One location in particular caught their attention: the American Museum of Natural History. Every day, thousands of visitors walked through its exhibition halls. Valuable artifacts were displayed behind glass cases and watched over by security personnel. To most people, stealing anything from the museum seemed almost impossible. But Murphy saw things differently. The first thing he studied was not the value of the exhibits, it was the security surrounding them. While visitors admired the museum's famous gemstones, Murphy paid attention to entrances, gallery locations, operating schedules, and the periods when the building was least crowded. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that even the most secure places were still operated by people. And any system created by people could contain weaknesses. That idea quickly evolved into a plan. This was no longer about breaking into an empty mansion. And it was no longer about stealing valuables from a waterfront home if successful. The next heist would transform Murphy from a local burglar into a name that would appear on newspaper front pages across the country. And with that decision, the groundwork was laid for what would become one of the most famous gem thefts in American history. After deciding to target the American Museum of Natural History, Murphy and his associates did not act immediately. They understood that this was no longer a waterfront mansion in Florida. Any mistake could end the plan before it even began. Over the following months, Murphy made multiple trips to New York. He spent his time studying the area around the museum, memorizing entrances, service doors, and the way people moved through the building each day. During the day, the museum was always crowded. Visitors, students, and tourists constantly flowed through its exhibition halls. But Murphy was not there to admire the exhibits, was there to observe everything else, paid attention to overlooked areas, periods when the museum became quieter, and the routines employees followed as they finished their shifts at the end of the day. His associates took part in the process as well. Each person focused on a different piece of information. Later, everything was combined to create a complete picture of how the museum operated. The more Murphy studied it, the more convinced he became that this famous institution was not as perfect as people believed. Behind the reputation and grandeur of one of America's most respected museums were details that few people ever noticed. Those were exactly the details he was looking for. By the middle of 1964, the plan had become more concrete than ever. Murphy was no longer asking whether the heist could be done. The only question remaining was when to make their move. And when that answer finally came, the group understood they were preparing for the biggest theft of their lives. After months of surveillance and preparation, the moment Murphy had been waiting for finally arrived. On a night in late October 1964, New York gradually settled into silence. The streets surrounding the American Museum of Natural History were no longer crowded as they had been during the day. The exhibition halls had closed. Visitors had left hours earlier. But for Murphy and his associates, the real work was just beginning. The three men moved toward the museum under the cover of darkness. They were no longer curious visitors studying the area. After months of planning, they knew exactly where they needed to go and which areas they needed to avoid. Everything happened quickly. Murphy's team approached the building and made their way inside. The vast hallways that were packed with visitors during the day now felt eerily silent. The only sound was the echo of footsteps in the darkness. Murphy led the group, constantly scanning his surroundings while his associates followed closely behind. No one knew exactly how much time they had before someone noticed something was wrong. With every passing minute, the pressure increased. Eventually, they reached the gem exhibition area. This was the target Murphy had spent months studying. The famous gemstones sat inside display cases under protective lighting. During the day, the room was always filled with visitors. But on that night, it was almost completely empty. The moment of decision had arrived. Murphy understood that once they took the next step, there would be no turning back. They failed, everything would end that night. If they succeeded, the heist would shock the entire nation. And then, the three men made their move. The moment Murphy had spent months preparing for had finally arrived. Inside the nearly dark gem exhibition hall, The three men stood before display cases containing some of the most valuable treasures in the United States. Only minutes earlier, they had been moving quietly through the museum's dark corridors. Now, the target was directly in front of them. Murphy did not hesitate. He raised the tool in his hand and struck the protective glass. The silence that had filled the museum for hours was instantly shattered. The glass cracked. One more strike. Then another. Within moments, the display cases that had been designed to protect priceless artifacts began to give way. Murphy and his two associates quickly reached inside. There was no time to hesitate. They knew that every passing second increased the risk of discovery. One by one, the gemstones were removed from their displays. Artifacts that had been admired by millions of visitors suddenly vanished into the darkness. The group worked as quickly as possible. Murphy continuously watched the surrounding area while his associates gathered the most valuable pieces they had identified during months of preparation. Everything happened even faster than they had expected. Before long, the bags they had brought with them were filled with stolen treasures, and in front of them stood shattered display cases. Inside were empty spaces. Where the famous gemstones had once rested, was the unmistakable evidence that one of the boldest thefts in American history was taking place. But Murphy understood that stealing the gems was only half the job. The greater challenge was getting them out of the museum before anyone had the chance to stop them. And as the final pieces were placed into their bags, the three men prepared for the most dangerous stage of the entire operation. They still had to escape, and they had to do it before it was too late. The bags were full. Murphy immediately signaled it was time to leave. The three men quickly moved away from the gem exhibition, carrying millions of dollars worth of stolen treasures. The dark hallways they had carefully navigated on the way in now became their path to freedom. Murphy led the way. His two associates stayed close behind. No one spoke. Every ounce of their concentration was focused on getting out of the museum as quickly as possible. The bags grew heavier with every step, but no one was willing to leave anything behind. Inside those bags was the result of months of planning and preparation. The group moved through corridors and stairwells in near darkness. Every turn had to be correct. Every minute mattered. The museum remained quiet. For the moment, it seemed as though no one had discovered what had happened inside the gem hall. That silence gave them a chance, but it also created a dangerous illusion. Murphy knew that many carefully planned crimes had fallen apart during the final moments. Getting inside had been difficult. Taking the gems had been risky, but escaping with them was the part that could still destroy everything. Finally, the exit came into view. Freedom was only a few steps away. Yet Murphy understood that until they were completely gone, the operation was not over. One mistake, one unexpected encounter, one person in the wrong place at the wrong time. That was all it would take. And for Murphy's team, the most critical moments of the heist were happening right now. The museum doors closed behind them. Murphy and his two associates stepped outside without encountering a single obstacle. The cold night air immediately surrounded them. But no one relaxed. The job would not be complete until they were far away from the scene, a short distance away. The convertible Murphy had arranged in advance was still waiting in the shadows. Had been parked there for hours. Murphy led the group across the quiet grounds. Each man carried bags filled with gemstones and priceless artifacts worth a fortune. No one panicked. All three did their best to appear calm and controlled. Within minutes, they reached the vehicle. The bags were quickly loaded into the car. Murphy slid into the driver's seat. His associates climbed in immediately afterward. Everything was unfolding exactly as they had planned. The engine started. The car slowly pulled away from the museum. Behind them was the scene of a theft that would not be discovered for hours. Ahead lay the dark streets of New York City. Murphy kept both hands firmly on the wheel, knew the danger was far from over. If they were stopped now, the gems in the car would become undeniable evidence. One traffic stop. One suspicious police officer. One unexpected problem. That was all it would take to bring the entire operation crashing down. But on that night, luck remained on their side. The streets were quiet, no alarms followed them, no police cars appeared in their mirrors. The convertible continued through the city, carrying away one of the most valuable collections of stolen gems in American history. And little by little, the vehicle disappeared into the lights of New York. The car moved farther away from the city center. After a long drive, the group arrived at a location they had prepared in advance. Was a secluded place few people would ever notice. The door closed behind them as soon as the vehicle was brought inside. The bags were unloaded and lined up across the floor. For the first time since leaving the museum, Murphy began examining the results of the heist. Rare jewelry, famous gemstones, Historic artifacts worth enormous sums of money. Everything appeared to be intact. His two associates assumed the stolen items would soon be sold. But Murphy had a different plan. He ordered that the entire collection be hidden for the time being. No one was to contact potential buyers. No one was to brag about what had happened. And no one was to use or display any of the stolen pieces. Everything had to disappear from public view and Murphy's mind. That was the only way to avoid attention after a crime of this magnitude. Over the next several hours, the stolen property was sorted, divided, and concealed in multiple locations. Every step was taken carefully. Every decision was made with one goal in mind: leave as little trace as possible. By the time the work was finished, almost nothing remained to connect the group directly to the crime. Meanwhile, beyond those closed doors, life in New York continued as normal. The city had no idea that one of the boldest museum thefts in American history had just taken place. As the sun rose, everything at the American Museum of Natural History seemed perfectly normal. But only minutes later, the calm was shattered. An employee entered the gem exhibition hall and froze. The display cases had been smashed. The museum's most valuable treasures were gone. Within moments, alarms echoed throughout the building. Visitors were kept outside. Museum officials immediately contacted the New York Police Department. Investigators arrived soon afterward. The entire area was sealed off. Broken glass, footprints, and every small detail were carefully documented. Security personnel were questioned. Surveillance systems were reviewed. But what shocked everyone was how quickly the thieves had carried out the crime. The news spread across the city. Television stations interrupted regular programming to report the story. Famous gemstones that had once been displayed to millions had vanished without a trace. Experts called it one of the boldest thefts in American history. Rewards were announced for information that could help solve the case. The New York Police Department, working alongside the FBI, expanded the investigation. Meanwhile, Murphy and his two associates remained silent. They believed they had carried out the perfect crime. But they had no idea that from that moment on, the biggest manhunt of their lives had officially begun. In the first days after the theft, New York police and the FBI worked around the clock. Thousands of leads were investigated. Rewards were announced. Gem dealers across the United States were monitored. But the men responsible seemed to have vanished. Murphy continued living his life, did not rush to spend the fortune they had obtained, understood that the entire country was focused on the famous gemstones that had disappeared. But that confidence eventually became his weakness. Before long, investigators began following new leads. Jack Murphy and his accomplices were eventually arrested. During the investigation, some of the famous gems were recovered. However, not every item was returned to the museum. Some pieces had disappeared before police could find them. Some gemstones have been cut into smaller pieces or altered. And for certain artifacts, their true journey remains unclear even today. Jack Murphy paid for his crimes with years behind bars. The man who had once been a famous Florida surfer became known across America by another name: Murph the Surf. But what makes this case memorable decades later is not only the value of the stolen gemstones. It is the fact that three men shocked the entire country by carrying out one of the most daring thefts in American history. A crime that began with late-night drives past waterfront mansions in Florida and ended with the famous robbery at the American Museum of Natural History. This day, the story of Jack Murphy serves as a reminder that even places believed to be the safest can still contain weaknesses that no one expects.